As a father of 4 children, I coached my children from the time they were old enough to walk. I loved being a dad more than anything I have ever done in my entire life. I couldn't wait till my children were born, and then again, as soon as they started walking, I was out there teaching them how to run, and then teaching them how to kick the ball, throw the ball, do whatever, because athletics were just very important to me, right? What I didn't realize when they were growing up and they were young is how intense of a coach I was, right? So I had this neighbor who was a good friend who came out to the soccer game, right? Now my oldest son at the time was 4 years old. And Adam was a pretty good little athlete at 4 years old. Who knows, right? I mean, he could run up and down the field. But the important thing is that at 4, I was trying to teach him win, win, win. So my neighbor videotapes me coaching. And then being a good neighbor, right, she comes over with this, back then it was a VHS video, right, and says, hey, Torch, you might want to look at this, right, and just, you know, because her son was on the team, right, and so I look at this thing, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that can't be me, right? I mean, these are 4-year-old kids, and I'm running up and down the field yelling, you know, get behind him, defend the goal, you got to kick, you got to score, right? I mean, and I'm watching this, and I'm thinking, that can't be me, right? Of course, my wife's sitting next to me saying, but that is you, right? Okay, so as we progress in time and the kids get a little bit older, I remember Adam specifically, 12 years of age now, he's a pitcher on the baseball team that I'm coaching. And this is in the championship round of baseball. And I'm standing on the sideline, and I'm the coach, of course, and he's out there and he's pitching, and he keeps throwing balls, right? If you're familiar with baseball, that's outside the strike zone. And I'm yelling at Adam, Adam! Some of my students here may have heard this story. Adam! Throw strikes! You know? So after he's walked these kids all the way around, I call a timeout. I need to talk to my pitcher, right? So I march out there to the mound and I said, Adam, come on, man, you got to throw strikes. We're losing here. The bases are loaded. And you've been throwing balls. He's 12. He looks up at me and he says, Dad, do you think I'm trying to throw balls? Because I'm not. I'm trying to throw strikes. And I don't know why it took that many more years, 8 more years, before I had what's called an epiphany, a change in my mindset, that I was a yeller. Shouldn't be a surprise that I was a yeller, right? That I yelled. I grew up in a home where they yelled. It's interesting that they asked me to talk about stop the cycle and the abuse. I don't think anybody back there who asked me knew that I came from an abusive home. I left home when I was 16 years of age to get away from my father. I planned my life from the time I was 5 years of age until I was 16. My entire life was based around how I could avoid being in the same location as my father. That's how I lived my life. I understand yelling because it was a part of everything that took place in my home. I know about physical abuse. My father wasn't just a yeller, he was a hitter. I was part of that group in which every 9 seconds somebody in the United States calls in and says domestic abuse, right? Domestic violence. I was part of that group. And I didn't know that the rest of the world didn't live like that. I grew up in absolute fear. I ended up getting into law enforcement because they were the guys, the people who always showed up when my mom was getting beat up. The police would come and they would rescue her and us. And I thought at an early age, at around 8, that I didn't want to be like my dad. I wanted to be like those guys. You know, the ones who came to the house every time things were looking really, really bad. I wanted to be one of them. And so I made a decision at 8, literally at 8, because I thought that that age of accountability is 8. I can make my own decisions now, that I was going to go into law enforcement. And that's how I made the decision. And I lived for another 8 years in a situation that was horrific. It was like waking up and experiencing hell without realizing you're in hell. That's what abuse is. But for people who are in a situation where abuse is taking place around them, oftentimes they don't see it for what it is. They honestly believe that maybe that's how other children have to live, or what goes on in other people's homes. My mother, to this day, she's 81 years of age on Saturday, is a saint. She has been from the moment she gave birth to me. My mother was 15 years old when she got married. She turned, before her 21st birthday, she gave birth to her 5th child. Could you imagine raising 5 children, and you're not even 21. You got 5 little people there. Were it not for my mother, I have no idea where I would be today. Because through all of those years of abuse, she was the only shining light in my life. When I woke up in the morning and when I went to bed at night, the person I thought of was my mom. Now, my mom finally got away from the abuse as well, but unfortunately, she was there way too long. But there's not one, I'm 5 children, there are 5 children in our family. Not one of us got beyond 16 years of age before we left. Because it seemed like back then, when you finally got to the point where you could drive, you drove, and you went a long ways away. So from 16 on, I have been pretty much on my own. By the grace of God, literally, I fell into good friends. Because people who come from abused homes, oftentimes, as was stated here, they become abusers. My oldest brother, who I love dearly, he got it the worst. He is 3 years older than me. He's been married 8 times and been in and out of probably another dozen relationships because he couldn't break that cycle. He's in his 60s, and he's generally alone. I was very fortunate. The only thing that helped me, ultimately, when I finally separated myself from that abuse cycle, was I found friends who were members of the LDS church who actually took me with them, right? Now, I tell you that so you have a basis for where I'm coming from, right? Just because you come from an abusive situation doesn't mean you will be an abuser. You have a choice. But you cannot leave those circumstances without recognizing somewhere along the line that you have been tainted or touched or affected in some way. I thought yelling was a very normal thing. When Adam was about 12, and he said that to me out on the pitching mound, I've never forgotten that. Why? Because I came to a realization at that moment that I was a yeller, and that it wasn't making life better. It was making life worse. Now, he was the oldest, right? He turned out to be an exceptional athlete, just like all of my children did, and I've since apologized 100 times for yelling at him, and he'll always say, yeah, but I turned out pretty good, right? It's not an excuse, right? What I want you to understand about the abuse cycle is this, that each one of us individually have the ability to be whatever we want to be, regardless of where we came from, regardless of what home we were born into. My youngest son is African American. He is black. We adopted Jordan when he was a day old. Strange circumstances, but we adopted this little boy and we raised him in our home. When he started junior high school, I was transferred to Washington, D.C. I thought this was going to be a great opportunity to take Jordan to a place where there were lots of people who were black. And so we went out that first day to play football, and he tried out for the team, and he comes to the sideline and he says to me, "Dad, I don't know if I can compete." And I said, "What do you mean? Why can't you compete, Jordan?" He said, "Look, Dad, they're all black athletes." I said, "You're a black athlete." He said, "But I'm a Utah black athlete." I said, "Oh, okay, I didn't know there was a difference." He said, "Look at them, they're so fast, they're so strong," right? He had this preconceived notion of what black athletes were supposed to be like, right? So Jordan tried out for the football team. He actually ended up being a captain of that football team. He was their starting center and their starting middle linebacker. And he had a fantastic experience. He went on and became a great athlete in his own right. Why do I bring that up? Because my son Jordan is probably the most right-wing conservative extremist you'll ever find. And he gets away with it because of the color of his skin. Because he realized, and he says over and over and over again, people cannot be judged by the color of their skin or where they were born or whatever. We all have a choice. Easy when you're born into this situation, where you're not in the inner cities of Philadelphia, which is where his family came from. At a football game about a month ago, I've never really heard this from Jordan before, but he was sitting next to me, and he was talking around me at another person that was here who was asking him when they discovered that he was my son sitting next to me. We don't look a lot alike, right? But said, "Jordan, well, what do you think then about this whole adoption thing?" And he said, "I thank my Heavenly Father every day for the adoption, because I think what it would have been like for me to be raised in the inner cities of Philadelphia without a dad, and I wonder if I could have made it." Circumstance oftentimes does dictate things and attributes or personalities or things that we're subjected to, but it doesn't define us. And afterwards, on the way home, I said to him, "Jordan, what defines you is not into which home you were born. What defines you as a human being is what you do with what you have. And what you have is the ability to help others be better. As human beings, as white people, black people, brown people, it doesn't matter. You know, he's one of these kids that young people, I should say, right? When you're as old as I am, you're all kids, Grace, you know, huh? Grace is adopted, right? Right, Grace? Yep. Grace was one of my star students in my class. Grace is one of those people who comes here and sits down with this group here. Why? Because she wants to be better today than she was yesterday. And you define yourself not by whether or not you were born here, there, who your parents are, but who you are. Right, Grace? Right? Now, Grace won't tell you that because Grace is pretty quiet. But she's also probably one of the most intellectual people you will ever find. A star student, right? Not just an average student, a great student. That's who she is. But that's who she decided to become. You see, we all are subject to some form of abuse as we go through life, aren't we? Right? Somebody's a yeller, somebody else demeans, right? Calls you names, intimidates, threatens, lies to you, whatever it might be. There's all of these different factors that are out there. You may have watched this video and thought to yourself, gee, wow, some of those things I've seen, maybe in myself or someone else. Does it mean you're in an abusive relationship? No, but it might mean that. What it means is that all of these little things, when you put them together, may lead to that. Most people in my 40 years in working in some form of law enforcement, I have discovered that most people don't wake up with the intent to be bad people, even abusers. Interestingly enough about my father, his father was just like him, his stepfather. He was part of that cycle. My brother is part of that cycle that has yet to stop because his children are now acting out as he did. So who determines, through in this environment in which we have good, the bad, the ugly, the mean, the cruel, the whatever, who determines whether or not we're going to break the cycle, start the cycle, be part of a cycle? Who determines that? Grace does. I do. You do. You individually, every one of you, have the ability to be as good as you want to be or as bad as you want to be. We will never, in this life, reach a level of perfection, but it isn't because we're going to stop trying to be there. Had it not been for one guiding light in my life, which was my mother, I probably would have been in the same boat as my two brothers, especially my older brother. Are you the guiding light that helps to break cycles, or are you part of the cycle? That's something you have to decide, right? So a little story about a kindergarten school teacher in Chicago, Illinois, some years ago. True story. So she's teaching this class, and as part of the exercise, or coming up to Thanksgiving, she asks all the students to draw a picture of the thing that they are most thankful for. And everybody draws a picture. And at the end of the class, she asks them to bring the pictures forward, and she looks them over. And at the next class cycle, when everybody shows up, she says, I have these pictures here that you all drew. And I've got pictures of Santa Claus, and I've got pictures of your moms and dads. I've got all these different pictures, but I have one picture here of nothing more than a hand. And she said to the little fellow in the back, and I don't know if his name was Michael or Jimmy or some other common name out there, she said, can you tell us about your picture? And about that time, other kids were raising their hand, and they were trying to guess whose hand that might be. That's the hand of God, teacher. That's the hand of Santa Claus. That's, all these different descriptions of whose hand that could be. And she said, again, can you tell us about this hand? And he said, that's your hand. At that moment, she realized that he saw her as something more than a teacher. She reflected back on all the mornings when he had shown up for class without his hair combed. She'd taken out a comb and combed his hair. When he sat alone in the lunchroom with nobody around to eat with him, she would go and sit down next to him. When he showed up without a lunch, she would give him her lunch. And here at this most critical moment where he could put down on a piece of paper what he was absolutely the most grateful for, he drew a picture of her hand. Now, when I heard that story, I thought, if I were to draw a picture of the hand I'm most grateful for, it would be my mother's hand. Because in spite of everything that she went through, she never gave up on a belief in God, and she never gave up on her belief in me. Even when I left home at 16 and never returned, she would meet me at different places to try and sneak me money or food or whatever she could when I would contact her so that she would know that I wasn't going to starve to death, right? To this day, I revere her because she was that one hand in my life. The question you have to ask yourselves is if you were to ask someone to draw what is they're most thankful for, is there a remote possibility that your hand would show up on that paper? Now, we can all sit and we can think to ourselves about all the things that have happened to us, the good, the bad, the whatever, and we can feel sorry for ourselves as well. And I don't say this because I don't have compassion for people who have been abused, because I do. I have tremendous compassion for them. I spent years and years and years responding to domestic abuse calls, right? Family fights, we called them back then. And it was pretty pathetic and sad to see so many people who were living in a situation that they couldn't get out of, or they thought they couldn't get out of. I mean, I would have a jurisdiction or a geographical area that I would be assigned to, and we would go to the same house over and over and over again. They didn't have laws like they do now where, you know, after a while, it's over. Back then, it just happened over and over and over again. And I used to see these little children, right? Do you know that 15 million children every year are victims of abuse, the abuse cycle? 15 million. And I saw lots of them. And some I knew would find their way out, and some that wouldn't. And so I had to ask myself a lot of times, am I doing enough to help all of these people, right? It wasn't limited to there. When I went to work for the state, it was other places. When I worked in the Washington, D.C. area, it was there. When I worked in Latin America, it was there. And it's everywhere. And the interesting thing is when I said back when I was talking about people don't generally wake up in the morning and say, I'm just going to be a really bad person. I'm going to be an abuser today. Sometimes it's a small cycle, and that's why they call it a cycle. And if you watched your movie up here, it talked about what they are, right? If you're somebody who likes to belittle other people, you're part of the cycle, the negative cycle, right? Could you imagine what it would be like if every day, Grace, when you walked into a classroom, your professor walked up to you and said, Grace, you are stupid. You're just stupid. I only have to say it twice and it affects you, doesn't it? Could you imagine if I said it every single day? After a while, what would you think that I thought of you? Not good. Did you think that I think you're stupid? And that affects people profoundly. Or to say to someone, you're a handsome guy, so I can say this to you. You're ugly. Do you imagine if somebody said that to you every single day? You're ugly. You're just ugly, right? After a while, how would you feel? You know, the movie said that some cultures believe that it's okay to be physically abusive or physically, discipline your children. Well, I'm going to tell you that there is no culture that has the ability to say that they're the only ones, right? I come from a full Palangi home in which hitting you up along the back of the head was a very normal thing. A little harder than that one, incidentally, right? Or, you see, with my dad, it wasn't his hands always either, right? It was a garden hose, or it was a baseball bat, or it was a stick, or whatever he could get his hands on. When I went to school, right, I a lot of times had to tell the gym teacher that I was sick because I didn't want to put on my gym shorts to show what my legs looked like. That was how I went through junior high school. So, but it didn't start with just my dad hitting me there. See, it was always kind of one of those deals where I made him angry. I remember one time at 1 o'clock in the morning, my brothers and I, we lived on a little farm. We were responsible for watering all the hay. I couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years of age. My brother was 12. My younger brother, he was just a year younger than I was. And we were out there, and our job was to put a canvas dam, right, which is this big piece of material, in the middle of this big ditch. And there was a board there, and then we'd put dirt around it, and we'd put it down there so when the water hit it, it would back it up and it would go over the banks, right? Some of the older folks know what farming is about, and that's what we did there, right? That was my job at 8 or 9 years of age. I was expected to be out there doing that. And I remember being woken up at 1 o'clock in the morning because the dam had broken. The water had gone through and the field didn't get watered. And it wasn't one of those things where, you probably need to do a better job of damming up the water. It's very violent waking up. And there I stood out there with a flashlight at 1 o'clock in the morning with my 2 brothers, all of us sobbing, trying to figure out how we're going to stop the water. It's a lot easier to set that dam before the water comes through. I know what the abuse cycle is all about. And see, but it was my fault. It was my fault because he wouldn't have been angry at me, he wouldn't have hit me, wouldn't have hurt me if I would have just stopped up the water, right? If I would have done that right, properly, then I wouldn't have gotten that beating at 1 o'clock in the morning. It was my fault. See, I made him angry. And those are the kind of excuses that you hear out there, right? See, people who physically abused, generally abused emotionally, verbally, psychologically, long before they got to the point of hitting someone. They called people stupid or ugly or whatever. They reveled in that power and control that comes from making someone else afraid of them. If you live in a world in which you are afraid of someone else, we're going to have to make a difference. We're going to have to change that because you deserve better than that. And if you're in a relationship in which you're afraid to go home, or you're afraid to speak up or voice your opinion, then it's time to do something about it. Don't wait until the person does something more than threaten. And don't wait until they hit you and then they say, oh gosh, man, I'm sorry. Had you not made me angry, I wouldn't have hit you, right? Yeah, that's a cycle, right? So which hand are you? See, because honestly, right, I was very grateful I had a stepfather later on that married my mom, and that's who I got sealed to, and he was this great human being, right? He was everything that my mother deserved in life, right? So if I were to put his hand next to hers, that'd be great. But if I were to say, right, draw a picture of the hand you least liked in life, it would have been my biological father's hand. So I present the concept of 2 hands. Which one is yours? You're either building people, you're either helping people, you're either the person who's out there making people feel better about themselves, or you're the other hand. And on the other hand is not the hand you want to be. And whose choice is it? It's yours. And again, I will tell you, I've been doing this for 40 years. And if I went into the story of how I ended up here, it's a long story, right? To be honest with you, I love this campus. I love the people that are here and everything else. I've loved everywhere I've ever worked, right? But I loved Latin America more than any place I've ever worked, ever. In the most vile and violent atmosphere, I found some of the most choice and wonderful, beautiful human beings ever. They lived in a hell, and they still made it heaven. And all I wanted to do was help them make it heaven. I failed. I will tell you that all my work and efforts down there meant nothing. I mean, they made no difference whatsoever, but it isn't because I didn't try. The point is, you have a beautiful environment you're living in right now. Be the hand, no matter where you are, no matter where you came from, no matter where you think you're going. In the tale of 2 hands, you be the hand that makes a positive difference in the lives of other people. Never find yourselves in a cycle in which you are part of the abuse, whether by name-calling, belittling, lying, being involved in vices like pornography or gambling or addictions like alcohol or things of that nature, all of which are abusive to the person who's next to you. You be this hand. The hand that when people lay down to go to bed at night, they thank their Heavenly Father for your hand. And that's how you break the cycle. If you are an abuser, stop it right now. Don't let another moment go on in your life in which you could be somehow characterized as an abuser. Let this be your moment, like mine with a 12-year-old on a baseball field, or watching my videotape of my 4-year-old out there playing soccer, where you realize something's got to change. Let right now be that moment. If you're being abused or you're afraid of abuse, then it has to stop right now. And that's what you have all these people around for, to help you find out either how to get out of it or how to manage it. But you don't have to live in it. You don't. Amen.